Welcome back to the Behavioral Gabaret. I'm Carrie Woodward, a board certified behavior analyst and lifelong observer as to why people do the weird things that they do, including myself.
And I'm Jayvin Encarnacion, behavior analyst, consultant, and someone who's finally come to terms with the fact that finding myself is just locating a well reinforced response class.
Today we're digging into chapter 18, the self. Skinner does what Skinner does best. He takes a concept everyone treats like sacred ground, identity, choice, and the soul, and he replaces it with observable behavior.
Right. He says the self isn't some inner puppeteer pulling levers. It's just the name we give to a consistent set of behaviors shaped by reinforcement history. You're not a self who acts, you're a repertoire that interacts.
We'll talk about why people cling so tightly to this illusion of like the inner chooser, how our different selves at work and at home and online are really just functional variations, and why self awareness itself is a social skill that we learn through feedback.
And Skinner goes even deeper. He uses behavioral principles to explain repression, rationalization, and even art. Turns out avoiding punishment can produce poetry.
So, if you've ever wondered who you really are, Skinner's answer is a beautifully organized set of contingencies.
Let's get into it because this chapter doesn't just analyze the self, it dismantles the illusion of one.
Okay, so Skinner replaces the inner self with what he calls functionally unified system of responses that are shaped by context and reinforcement. So, how does that help explain why we seem to have different versions of ourselves at work and at home or who you are online? What are your thoughts?
I think his way of functionally describing the concept of the self, because that's what it is. It's a concept. It's not something that we can see or touch or hold or even observe. And so describing it as unified systems of responses and even maybe tying into perceptions and things like that really helps to contextualize and describe it in a way that we can then discuss functionally. So I think it helps explain why there are different versions of us because we ourselves and the different selves that we have really comes down to, I think, probably forms of audience control where we adapt and adjust our behavior and even what would be considered personality based on
Hmm.
the setting and context.
Yeah.
And that helps to explain all of those phenomena happening rather than these inner workings and this mind that's controlling our behavior. It's just we're adapting to the environment, which is what we keep coming back to. What about you?
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I think what's so cool is that through the next chapters that we're talking about, we actually sort of come back to a couple of the same themes.
Yeah.
But I love this idea of like work carry versus in my house family carry, or even like generational, right? Like the people that I knew in my past, the contingencies that were like I went to my 25-year high school reunion a couple of weeks ago, and like that carry was completely defined by a different set of contingencies than the Carrie that I am now. And so it's interesting to revisit those people who were a part of that controlling environment of who I was when I was 16 and 17 years old. And to see how like similar I could see pieces of myself as a younger person sort of coming out within that context. Um, and it's the whole thing about like who you are online, the contingencies are just so different online. There's so many different reinforcers and punishers that have shaped who we become online that may be very different than who we are in our day-to-day experiences. And I just think that's so fascinating. And what I also wonder is people who don't have this exposure to the way that the environment helps to shape who we are in our different settings and different fields and with different people, like how do they attribute who they are in one context versus who they are in a different context? Like how do you show up at work and how is that different than how you show up at home? And if you don't understand environmental control, to what do you attribute that change in the way that you act? Do you have friends that you can like think of that are very different in one setting than versus another?
No, I would say I am
Oh,
very different, and I've gotten feedback about that, and I think and culturally there are some contingencies at play for me. The idea of code switching comes up
yeah.
with the self and with audience control because with my family, our dynamics and culturally, our dynamics are really different. And I've noticed that as I've gotten older. And so I will engage in behaviors that would be considered code switching, often in a professional setting. I think the person that I am at school, like in school context or at work, is very different from the person that I am, even as a friend. And the feedback that I've gotten is that it's very jarring because I can switch instantly.
Oh,
And I didn't
wow.
know that I can go from school to work mode in an instant, and that it can be jarring to some people because of the contrast is so stark.
Oh,
Um, and so that really it's really interesting about the idea of the different selves
yeah.
and how even within in one setting, I can switch from different contingencies or contexts. Like at work, if I'm with someone who I would consider a friend, I'll be one way and then immediately shift if someone else comes around. And so that I think it also helps to validate the way that Skinner talks about it because
100%.
there aren't multiple I don't have multiple personality disorders, so there aren't multiple people happening in here as
Uh-huh.
far as I'm aware. So I think it's just the context and the environment that I'm responding to.
It does make me feel a little sad though, because it's evidence that the you who you are with your family, I don't know if you can make an argument for who's the authentic
Mm-hmm.
you, but the you that you are with your family was obviously punished in some more professional context. Otherwise, that shaping wouldn't have happened. That discrimination
Yeah.
of behavior wouldn't have happened. So it does sort of make me at least feel a little sad for people that do have that high level of code switching, because it just means that they've experienced some pretty negative contingencies for being the person that they probably were more authentically in their family life or in their like with their close friends as they were younger.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good way to put it. I think my behavior has definitely been shaped. So,
Yeah.
some
Yeah,
things to think about. But for women too, definitely the same
that's true.
thing.
Yeah.
So I think we've all probably, or many of us, not all of us, I'm sure, have experienced that.
Well, and I
Um,
wonder too how much age comes into play with just what contingencies we're more sensitive to. I can tell you that as a
hmm,
43-year-old woman who's like very confident and comfortable in my skin, I think I'm a lot less sensitive to negative contingencies. For like I'm allowed, like I like bright colors, and I'm big. I'm a big personality, and I see that sort of manifest in all areas. In school, at work,
oh, okay.
when I go to get dinner with my grad school professor, at home. Um, and so I wonder too, as we get older, I don't think I was as comfortable when I was younger. I was
Oh,
probably a
yeah.
lot more sensitive to negative like looks or people that were like uncomfortable with that level of loud. And I think I'm less sensitive to that now.
That's I think that's a really good way to put it. And it kind of comes back to, or maybe comes to the idea about authenticity, which we
Yeah,
talk about a lot. And there's no, there, right now, when people talk about being authentic, what does that even mean? And I
right.
think this idea about the self and Skinner's operational definition of it really brings that into play too. And there's an opportunity there for another podcast episode.
Totally.
Authenticity.
I'm gonna put a pin in this. All of the like the mental health buzzwords I would love to talk about one day,
Oh
like
yeah.
empowered and embodied and authentic and all of these like they get thrown around so much in pop culture. I would love to be able to do like an operational definition of what the hell does that even mean?
Yes, and belongings one. I know that Mary Jane just wrote a paper on it, which I need to get my hands on. But
Oh,
I follow Brene Brown a lot, and she uses words like vulnerability,
yes.
authenticity,
Yeah.
belonging, shame, and
Man, those all
so
would have been really great topics for our
yes.
our paper on terms. Uh,
Um. Anyway, so Skinner treats the idea of the self and the self knowledge as basically this way that we have learn through social reinforcement about who we are. And so actually other people have told us who we are in many ways. And so people asking things like, what are you doing? And why did you do that?
mhm.
These questions bring to mind, mine, what exactly is happening. What do you think that says about why some people seem naturally more self-aware and others kind of avoid looking inward?
Mm. Okay, so I think that because I'm a parent and I have little ones, I sort of see this developing through them. The more that we talk, the more that we ask our kids to identify what they're doing and be aware of what they're doing and check in with themselves. I think also the way that we speak about young kids. I had a meeting with a parent this last week, and just in asking her to describe her son and tell me the things that were great about him, she was sort of like self-deprecating and getting down on herself because she said, "I fear that I have." I have sort of shaped the way that he talks, and I don't know that she said shaped, but like the way that he talks about himself, because he was being introduced to somebody, and they said, like, tell us about yourself, and he said, I'm annoying. And she's like, "Oh
Oh,
my God, I say that all the time. Like, you're being annoying. Why are you being annoying?" And so just bringing a focus on the verbal behavior that surrounds the way that we describe what kids are doing and what they are, plays such a huge role in how they come to perceive themselves and who their self is, like who they are. So I've been taking that lesson to heart, very much so in the way that I'm talking to and about my kids, and also just what I'm coaching the parents that I work with on. Like, can you stop talking about them like this in front of them? I think that sometimes as practitioners, we get a bad rap for talking about some of our clients while they're sitting right there as if they're not there. And I will say that at this stage, I feel like practitioners do a much better job. Parents are just like, they will unleash and just completely speak without a filter about their kids and what they're doing. And they're sitting right there.
that's so interesting. And because the in my training as a behavior technician, that was a huge no-no. So
Mhm.
you had to step out. You that was rule number two. Rule number
Yeah.
one was never saying no. Rule number two is do not talk about the kid's behavior in front of them.
Yeah. Unless you're
So
including them in the conversation.
right, because
Yeah,
they
that they're
even if
there.
they don't have the language,
Yeah.
it came back to dignity too.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that does speak to something about maybe the way that people who are more self-aware are responding to contingencies that are happening and observing them. Um, and I'm wondering if contingencies of shame and guilt, or specifically shame, and coming back to that language piece and lessons that we've learned as children about why we do things, if that, like, the more experience a person has with contingencies of shame, the less likely they are to be more self-aware.
Yeah.
Um, and to ask those types of questions, if why are you doing X, Y, or Z is used as a punishing mechanism. That's really
Absolutely. And
interesting.
because, I mean, who, including adults, can articulate why they are doing anything? Who is actually pointing to the environmental contingencies for the purposes of their behavior? When you ask that question, why are you doing that? You're looking at some sort of internal cause.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm bad, because I am dumb, because I can't do X, Y, or Z. Um, I don't feel like you ever look at somebody who's doing really well and say, "Why are you doing that?" You know?
Yes.
And we know that the answer would be like, "Why are you doing that?" Because you haven't had adult attention in 10 minutes and you want it and you don't have the words to communicate that you'd like it, and so you did something wackadoo and now the teacher's providing you attention. But like then you turn that to the kid and say, "Why would you do that?" And they're like, "I don't I don't know, because I'm
And
bad."
I wonder, as you were saying that, what I started to think about was, it do people create, I guess, create narratives based on those types of questions? Is that like a key source of belief and rationales for why things are happening? Because that, I think you're spot on there, that that's a really pointed question. Why are you doing that? And we don't ask people who are doing really well or doing something perfectly, why are you doing that? So it's
Right.
a way to call attention. It's a disapproval essentially,
Of
but
course.
oftentimes people also want a response when that question
Yes.
is asked.
Right.
Um, Wow,
And
that's I
so
think
you
that's a lot to
say if
think
you
about.
don't know, I know, I mean, if you're not a behavior analyst, you have very little awareness of the control of the environment. It's all
Hmm.
attributed to some sort of internal cause, and especially for a child, if if the only things that you're being asked to talk about are your mistakes, then you do adopt that narrative. Why are you doing that? I don't know, and so it must be that I'm inherently bad.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. I think these are some great questions, and I something that behavior analysis should probably get into a little bit more. Uh,
Everything. I think that about everything.
yes. With that being said, toward the end, he talks about art and fantasy, which I love. And he works by finding reinforcement while dodging punishment. Or he says that these things work by finding reinforcement. So identifying reinforcement while getting away and escaping punishment. How does this idea change about how we think about things like creativity or even where the line is between expression and restraint?
Well, you know what I think is just such a cool conversation because, again, the idea of somebody who is creative is usually looked at as if it's some sort of
Mm-hmm.
internal cause. Like you were born that way. I mean, everybody that I talk to that is describing their kids as being creative is always like, yeah, they just have this amazing imagination. But I think that it's so cool. Like, one of the things that we talk about a lot with kids is the more stuff they have, the more toys they have, the easier it is for them to like basically satiate with a given toy set and then move on to something else. And it's because they have just unending options and that it's through boredom. Like essentially, I've maximized the things that I have done with this, and now it's become boring. I have to do something different with it to access reinforcement again. And it's in not that novel behavior where there's more automatic reinforcement been built in for that novelty. And I think that's sort of how you get this creative people is that, they hit a wall with what they're doing and it's no longer producing its own automatic reinforcement. And if I do something different, now all of a sudden there's reinforcement built in there. And so and then we know that
Mm-hmm.
variability and novelty is this own sort of reinforceable operant. And so if you can access reinforcement for something that's new or different, you're more likely to do new and different things in the future as well. Um, what are your thoughts on it?
Two things. One, I read an article about creativity for my master teacher rank, and they said a lot of what you said, but they also tied it to flexibility, and so
Mm,
being like flexible, and they tied it to problem solving and having to have problems and being okay with the discomfort, essentially being okay with the discomfort of
yeah.
having a problem and finding creative solutions was just kind of what Skinner talked about with problem solving was just trying different things to see
Uh-huh.
what was then reinforced rather than doing engaging in responses that had worked in the past. And so in the context of creativity, it was about trying a different, like different paintings, a different way to paint, or maybe creating something new, and then seeing how the new product provided a source of reinforcement compared to what they had previously experienced. And I think on the second note, specifically about, I think, fantasy and
Mm,
even maybe not the fantasy genre, but the idea about fantasy that we might even engage in through what's conditioned seeing,
uh-huh.
and daydreaming,
Visual
those
imagining. Yeah.
creating these scenarios where people get to play out and almost through observational learning that they're seeing and imagining are able to enact scenarios and do things that wouldn't either be possible or wouldn't contact reinforcement.
Would be
And
punished,
so
probably.
when he says dodging punishment, I think that's an incredibly
Yeah, yeah.
in telling experience. I did have, not to get too personal, but I used to fantasize a lot as a child
Yeah.
and as a teenager, and it was really embarrassing to myself. But I think some of the things looking back on it, I was able to be a different self, a different version of
Yeah.
myself, and that self got to do all of the things that the real Javen couldn't do or couldn't experience. And that's a very common thread that you'll see weaved with people who had experienced uh, excessive fantasy. And so
Yeah,
I think the way that he's able to tie that in without access to the internet too, where he can't, it's not like he was able to look up these things. So he had to
right.
have some like information and ties to it to be able to so comprehensively talk about these topics.
Well, and what he does so beautifully here, as he does so beautifully in every chapter, is take it away from it being a person and being something that's shameful and
Mm-hmm.
explains it just with the contingencies and understanding what's happening at the level of the environment to explain behavior. You're not a big person. You're not a person that fantasizes a lot and then feels shame about it because it's it's like you were getting to access reinforcement that wasn't available to you if those behaviors had been overt.
Mm-hmm.
Easy. I
Yeah,
love
I
the way
think that's
Taylor
it.
does it.
He's great at
Yep.
that.
Yep. Well, that wraps up the self, and I feel much more self-aware.
Yeah, same here. So link in the bio, like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
It's the